Now, here's something else that happens, the completion. Well, we read it in Matthew 3. The Spirit, John saw the Spirit alighting upon Yeshua like a dove. Okay? So we go to Acts chapter 2. That was powerful. When we are immersed, it says, if we are united to him through immersion in the likeness of his death, certainly we also, when we come out, we will be in the likeness of his resurrection, right? And we saw when Yeshua was immersed, when he came up, what happened? The Spirit came upon him like a dove, okay? So in chapter 2 of the book of Acts, it says, when the day of Pentecost had come, Pentecost, that's a Greek word for 50. 50 days after the resurrection. Okay, now remember Yeshua resurrected and he showed himself to his disciples, speaking to them to confirm fulfillment of the prophecy and all this. And he showed them what he was capable of after resurrecting. He was able to do what? Control his molecular structure. He can speed him up or slow him down. He can speed it up enough to walk through doors. He can slow it down enough for you to see him, you see? And he can speed it back up enough to teleport from one location to the next at the speed of thought. I'm just saying, we're supposed to grow into the likeness of his resurrection and function in the fullness of his anointing, okay? So 50 days. So after 40 days, and then they waited 10 days later, 50 days. That's why they just say Pentecost, but 50 days after his death, burial, and resurrection had fully come, they were all in one accord in one place. Verse 2, and suddenly there came a sound from heaven as of a rushing mighty wind, right? It says, and it filled the whole house where they were sitting. Then there appeared to them, says, verse 3, tongues as of fire, distributed and resting on each one of them. And they were all filled with the Ruach Kadosh, with the spirit of the sanctuary, and began to speak with other tongues as the Spirit gave them utterance, right? And then the crowd responded, right? And there were dwelling in Jerusalem Yehudi, devout men from every nation under heaven. Because, remember, Israel was scattered upon the face of the earth in all nations. So, but they came back for Passover, as they were able to, right? And so they were gathered together, devout men from every nation under heaven. And when this sound occurred, the multitude came together and were confused because everyone heard them speak in his own language. Then they were all amazed and marveled, saying to one another, look, are not all these who speak Galileans? And how is it that we hear each in our own dialect in which we were born, or language? Parthians and Medes and Elamites, those dwelling in Mesopotamia, Judea and Cappadocia, Pontus and Asia, Phrygia and Pamphylia, Mitzrayim or Egypt, and the parts of Libya adjoining Cyrene, visitors from Rome, both Yehudi and proselytes, Cretans and Arabs, Arabians, we hear them speaking in our own tongues the wonderful works of powers. So they were all amazed and perplexed, saying to one another, whatever could this mean? And others mocking said, they are full of new wine. Then Peter got up and he said, look, standing up with the 11, he raised his voice and said to the men of Judea and all who dwell in Jerusalem, let this be known to you and heed my words. For these are not drunk as you suppose, since it is only the third hour of the day, that is 9 a.m. But this is what was spoken by the prophet Joel, and he quotes from Joel 2:28-32, and he says, and it will come to pass in the last days, says powers, that I will pour out my spirit on all flesh. Your sons and your daughters will prophesy, your young men will see visions, and your old men will dream dreams. And on my men servants and on my maid servants I will pour out my spirit in those days, and they will prophesy. In other words, prophecy is speaking the words of Yahweh Elohim, speaking the words of powers, Yahweh of powers, right? I will show wonders in heaven above and signs in the earth beneath, blood and fire and vapor of smoke. The sun will be turned into darkness and the moon into blood before the coming of the great and awesome day of Yahweh. And it will come to pass that whoever calls on the name of Yahweh will be saved. Okay? Now, there's controversy in certain Christian circles about tongues, yea or nay. It just happened then, one time only, and that was it. But let's see what the scripture says about it, and you make the choice. First off, it says that all who were present from different cities and countries on earth were there, and what got their attention was the miracle of knowing that your brother from Pamphylia could not speak the language of the Parthians or the Medes, but yet they were speaking in tongues in those languages. So whoever was speaking in a tongue was speaking in some language that those who were present knew that they could not do because that was their language. And so that miracle caused them to submit to the spirit that was reigning to unite his people as one, right? And that, the Ruach Kadosh, the spirit of the sanctuary, is what unites us, yeah? And they spoke in tongues. Let me go back to in beginnings or Genesis chapter 11 to get a foundation of why we need to speak the same language or have the same lip. So in Genesis or Bereshit, translation is in beginnings, chapter 11, it says, verse 1 says, and all the earth was of one lip and of unified words. The word lip in Hebrew is Saphah, Sin, Pei, He. Sin, Pei, He. Saphah. That's the word for lip. And the function of it is to complete, to end something naturally, right? It also means the hem of a garment, the lip of something, the edge, right? Or it also means a riverbank, and obviously it is the Hebrew word for lip, our lips, right? And also the word for mustache. Black men, stop shaving off your mustaches. That was there's a purpose for it. Most importantly, that is the word that they translate as language. Because what comes out of your lips? Words. Yeah? Language. Okay? Lip. Saphah. To complete. To end naturally. Right? So he said that all the earth was of one language and unified words. Udvarim achadim. Sefa echad udevarim achadim. One lip, a lip of one, and words one. So they all spoke the same language and were unified in their words. Okay, now go to verse 6 of chapter 11. And it says, and Yahweh said, see, a people being one and one lip for all of them. I'm reading the Hebrew literal translation. And this they begin to do. And now, never will he protect from them all which they plot to do. Okay? Now, this is the Scriptures of the Way Hebrew translation of the Torah that I was led to do. It is complete. And so this is the literal Hebrew of verse 6. And Yahweh said, see, a people being one and one lip for all of them. And this they begin to do. And now, never will he protect from them all which they plot to do. The he that is not, here's the traditional translation. And Yahweh said, indeed, the people are one and they all have one language. And this is what they begin to do. Now, nothing that they propose to do will be withheld from them. Right? Now, nothing that they propose to do will be withheld from them. Why? Because they are unified. But the literal translation says, and Yahweh said, see, a people being one and one lip for all of them. And this is what they begin to do. What were they doing? They were building a tower to make a name for themselves. Name, Shem, has to do with identity. So they wanted their own identity outside of their creator. Like men today, we don't need to be accountable to our creator. We can live our own lives and make a name for ourselves, have our own identity, right? And do our own thing. Okay, so that's what he says. And this is what they begin to do. And he says, and now never will he protect from them all which they plot to do. That's what the Hebrew says, against what your traditional translation says. Now nothing that they propose to do will be withheld from them. So the Hebrew says, and now never will he. Who is the he? The he was the dragon, that serpent of old called the devil and Satan, who gave them the aspiration to depart from Yahweh and make a name for themselves, or have their own identity and exist outside of Yahweh, their creator. See? And Satan, that's what Satan will do. He will inspire you to do things, give you thoughts and suggestions to do things, but he will not let you know the consequence from it, right? And that's what Yahweh warns in verse 6 of chapter 11. And now, never will he, Satan, protect from them all which they plot to do. Do you understand? So therefore, Yahweh said, come, let us go down there and wear out their language, that they may not understand one another's speech. And so Yahweh scattered them abroad from there over the face of all the earth, and they ceased building the city. When you're not unified and you don't understand one another, then you can't move together, right? There was no let's agree to disagree, because it's impossible. It doesn't. So unity is the key. And because they couldn't understand one another's lip or language, those who did, which were family members or clans, then they departed and went their own way and settled and started communities and cities and life the way they wanted to, right? But it stopped all of humanity being united with that one lip and unified words, because once there's unity, whatever we set our minds to, nothing can stop it. You follow? So it stopped that foolish attempt to try to make a name for themselves and build a tower into the heavens. Amen. So that scattering of the tongues to give man a chance to be redeemed in the sovereignty of the Most High was reversed at 50 days after the resurrection of Yeshua, what they call the day of Pentecost, you see. And so now they were filled with the Spirit and spoke in tongues. Now, I was going to say this based upon what they experienced in the book of Acts about everybody speaking in a language that was somebody else's, right? So when a person speaks in tongues, now the word tongue is lawash, a tongue. You know, lamed, waw, shin. And the function of the tongue is to pronounce, right? It's also, you know, and it combining different elements is combining words together for a sentence or thoughts. You know, thoughts laid forth by the tongue is a word. See, a word is a thought laid forth by what vehicle? The tongue. To pronounce, you know, sounds, right? And is also the word for slander, a stone, and also a courageous lion. And the word to knead. What is the knead? Mixing dough, right? So yeah, it's like, you know, mixing words to communicate, right? In a sentence to something, right? Pronounced tongue. So you see, there have been many languages since the time of the Tower of Babel, right? Which was around 2200 BC. The time was around 2200 BC, 150 years after the flood. The flood was 1600 years after Adam. Okay? And then it was maybe a couple hundred years before Abraham. Okay? So whatever tongue you may speak when you're speaking in tongues, or speaking in tongues or praying in the Spirit, you can rest assured it was some language that existed at some point in time. Since 220 BC, there are a lot of dead languages that don't exist anymore because those peoples have died off, right? And with man, languages change because you take on idioms and words from your neighboring tribes, right? And so the language always changes, but the Hebrew has not, okay? So in 1 Corinthians chapter 14, Paul gives an explanation about what happens when you speak in tongues, lawash, or loshim. So in chapter 14 of 1 Corinthians, he says, you can read the whole chapter on your own. I'm just going to get to what my point needs to be for clarity. It says, chapter 14, verse 10, Paul says, there are, it may be, so many kinds of languages in the world, and none of them is without significance. So, although you may not understand, nobody may not understand the tongue dialect that you're speaking, rest assured it existed at some point in time, if not even today. There was one of the brothers of mine, when he was filled with the Spirit and started speaking in tongues, he don't know Hebrew. I know Hebrew. It sounded like Hebrew. And that just reinforced me that, I guess Yahweh did that for me to continue in my confidence and being courageous in declaring his truth. So, and I've had testimonies along in my life, even before I knew the languages in the churches I've been involved with, where it was proved true as well. Germans, because I was at one point 9 years at a nationally known European church, and Germans heard other people speaking in their high dialect of German in tongues, knowing that they had no clue about it. See? So he says in verse 10, there are, it may be, so many kinds of languages in the world, none of them is without significance. Therefore, if I do not know the meaning of a language, I will be a foreigner to him who speaks, and he who speaks will be a foreigner to me. Even so you, since you are zealous for spiritual gifts, let it be for building up of the assembly that you seek to excel. Therefore, let him who speaks in a tongue pray that he may interpret, right? For here, these are the things that happens when you pray in the Spirit, right? When you speak in a tongue. For if I pray in a tongue, number one, my spirit is praying. The spirit that I received upon coming out of the waters of immersion, right? The spirit of the sanctuary is praying, right? When I speak in tongues, right? But my understanding is unfruitful, right? It bypasses my intellect, my mind, okay? So what is the conclusion then? I will pray with the spirit, and I will also pray with the understanding, okay? So although I don't understand when I'm praying in the Spirit, I do know that my spirit is praying, right? So I won't cease to pray in tongues, but I will continue to pray with the understanding also, okay? I will sing with the Spirit, and I will also sing with the understanding. Oh, okay. So I will now, at times, as I feel led or choose to do it, I will also sing in the Spirit, like I most of the times do with the understanding and giving praise to Yahweh. And then he gives the reason why. Verse 16. Otherwise, if you bless with the Spirit, how will he who occupies the place of the uninformed say amen at your giving of thanks, since he does not understand what you say? Okay, I'm pulling this out of the context of Paul bringing clarity so that there's no confusion in an assembly when people are gathered together and then someone gets up and they start speaking in tongues. Visitors don't understand what's going on. So we are not to come together and everybody present not be edified, or you not be one in understanding and being built up and fellowshipping with one another, right? So that's what he's clarifying. So otherwise, if you bless with the Spirit, how will he who occupies the place of the uninformed, those are the visitors, say amen at your giving of thanks? So that's the other thing you do when you pray in the Spirit. You're giving thanks. Remember, the Spirit is praying. One of the things he's doing, he's giving thanks on your behalf. That I believe that he has opportunity to now move on your behalf. Or getting you out of the way. You're getting yourself out of the way. Since he does not understand what you say. Verse 17. For you indeed give thanks well, but the other is not edified. It's not built up. Okay? So these are things he's letting you know what happens when you, in secret, pray in the Spirit. Okay? But he's saying, don't do what you do in secret in public unless you're going to give an interpretation to those who are not there yet or don't understand. Amen? Okay, so, for you indeed give thanks well, but the other is not edified. Verse 18, Paul says, I thank my powers, I speak in tongues more than you all. Yet in an assembly, I would rather speak 5 words with my understanding, that I may teach others also, than 10,000 words in a tongue. Okay, so the point was, what happens when you pray in the Spirit? Your spirit prays on your behalf with groanings that cannot be uttered. Yeah. And he's able to thwart or circumvent any plots or plans that the enemy has against you that you don't even know. You follow me? In Romans 8:26, it says, likewise, the Spirit also helps in our weaknesses. Remember, the Spirit prays on our behalf? The Spirit prays. So likewise, the Spirit also helps in our weaknesses, for we do not know what we should pray for as we ought, but the Spirit himself makes intercession for us with groanings which cannot be uttered. So now he who searches the hearts knows what the mind of the Spirit is, because he makes intercession for the saints, for the prepared ones, for the devoted to meeting needs, the selfless ones, according to the will of powers. And we know that all things work together for good, for function, to those who love powers, to those who are the called according to his purpose. Amen? Right? So that we know that is taking place. We know that we're praising Yahweh better than we can with our understanding. Yeah? And we know that we're giving thanks also better than we could with understanding. And Paul says, this is significant, Paul says, I thank my powers that I speak in tongues more than you all. Why is that? Because when Ananias immersed Paul, it doesn't record in Acts chapter 9 that he was filled with the Spirit and spoke in tongues, right? In actuality, a lot of people who were immersed by Johanan, but John, it doesn't record that also. But in the book of Acts, you see that they were being filled with the Spirit after they were immersed under Peter and those disciples' leadership after Pentecost, after the 50 days of Yeshua's resurrection, and the Spirit fell upon all men and they spoke in tongues, right? And a lot of them got filled with the Spirit later. They said, I was only immersed in Johannan's immersion, right? I have not heard of tongues in certain passages. You read the book of Acts, you'll understand what I'm saying, right? And then he said, well, do you want to be filled? He said, yeah, fill me with the Spirit, right? And we know the passages where Yeshua said, who will ask the Father for bread and think he'll give him a stone or a serpent? No. Whatever you ask the Father, he will give you. So if you ask the Father for his Spirit to dwell in you, since I was successful and victorious at the cross, he will willingly, joyfully give you his Spirit. Okay? And with that Spirit that comes in you without measure, you can function in the fullness of the anointing that Yeshua functioned in. Amen? Okay, now go to Jude, book of Jude, verse 20 says, but you, beloved, now this is the last book before Revelation, right? Before the revealing, before the apocalypse. The word apocalypse actually means revealing, all things exposed. Imagine, right? And that's what Revelation means. Apocalypse is not something scary. Apocalypse literally means, the revealing. All things are exposed. like now, a whole bunch of lies are being exposed. Unfruitful works are being exposed, you see. So Jude, verse 20 says, "But you, beloved, building yourselves up in your most prepared or sanctified reliance and dependence, praying in the spirit of the sanctuary," praying in the prepared spirit, the spirit of powers. So there's the other thing we know what happens when you pray in the spirit. Right? Your spirit prays. You give thanks well. He prays, interceding on your behalf with groanings that cannot be uttered. Right? Circumventing or thwarting plots or plans of the enemy against you. And you build yourself up on your most prepared or sanctified reliance and dependence upon Yahweh. Amen? Praying in the Ruach Kadosh. Praying in the spirit of the sanctuary. Okay? Now, let me clarify this. Just because, you have the spirit and you can speak in tongues, there's a more concrete evidence that you do have the spirit, right? Because a lot of people have not activated their ability to speak in the spirit because of different teachings and stuff like that, and they go back and forth over two trains of thought. So they stay away from it. But how do I know that I have the spirit? And we know what the fruit of the spirit is. Here's one in Ephesians chapter 5, right? I'll start at verse 8. It says, "For you were once darkness, but now you are the light of Yahweh. Walk as children of light." We know light spells darkness. Dysfunctions can only function in darkness. So if you're there, guess what? Darkness flees along with its dysfunctions. So there's peace and harmony. Verse 9. "And the fruit of the Spirit," or that light, which the Spirit brings, "is in all devoting to meeting needs, chesed, and righting of wrongs, and speaking truth." Right? And we know the fruit of the Spirit is what? Love, joy, peace, long-suffering, kindness, goodness, meekness, and self-control. Against such there is no Torah, instructions, or teachings. That confirms that you are walking in the Spirit. But you should be able to pray in the Spirit and speak in tongues. You follow me? Because there are those who do pray in spirit and speak in tongues, but yet they are not bearing fruit that will confirm truly that you are filled with the Spirit. Walking in the light, devoted to meeting needs of others, being selfless, and speaking truth. So, in summary, Yahweh calls us out of darkness. We believe that Yahweh was Yeshua in the flesh, went to the cross, was victorious, died, resurrected, right? After 50 days, during the 40 days, he was giving witness to the disciples, confirming fulfillment of the prophecy, and then told them to wait 10 days. During those 10 days, he was in heaven, satisfying the heavenly temple's requirement, his blood sacrifice, and upon completing that, in the war, Michael and his messengers fought with the devil and his messengers, and they kicked him out, Satan and his messengers, so that they cannot go before the throne and accuse Yahweh's people anymore. And then the Spirit of Yahweh was able to come now and dwell within us because of the blood of Yeshua and his success at the cross. And so now you come out and you get immersed, you die to yourself, you come up, heavens are open. When you read the word, you'll have greater understanding of spiritual things now. You ask him, Father, fill me with your Spirit. The Spirit will come and dwell within you. And as you read the word, he will enable you now to do what would magnify Yahweh in your life, right? And the Spirit doesn't come with measure. It comes in full, right? Not in part. So you can speak in tongues because we need to fulfill all satisfying objective justice, all righting of wrongs, making corrections, right? And then the Spirit will comfort you, will remind you of the word, truth, bring to your remembrance all things, to stay in the light of Yahweh's presence, and lead and guide you into all truth, right? Now, we are supposed to imitate Yeshua, okay? Yeshua has been victorious. His kingdom is reigning. We've been transferred now as citizens of that kingdom. So we are ambassadors for Yahweh. We have diplomatic immunity. We're not subject to the decrees of Caesar, but we need to function in the fullness of the anointing. And you cannot, if you are not making use of all the tools that we've been equipped with. And tongues is one of those tools. You follow me? And we went over what happens when you pray in the Spirit, which we see is necessary, especially now. During this season of crisis, it is time for us to shine. It is time for us to rule and dominate in the midst of our enemies and be the light. Because people are fearing, frantic, and who do they have to look to? They should be looking to Yahweh's people. They should be looking to the assembly of Yeshua, HaMashiach, who said, on this rock I will build my assembly, and the gates of hell will not prevail against it. We are supposed to be the ones that the world looks to for healing. Go and do what I do. Heal the sick, raise the dead, cast out demons. Freely you have received, freely give. Right? And he left us his Spirit, the Spirit of Yahweh, as a guarantee of his purchased possession, us. You follow me? So we need to be united. That's that one language that we should be united with. Tongues. Like they were in beginnings, Bereshit, Genesis chapter 11:1. But they had a different goal for that one lip and unified words. Okay? But in Yeshua, he redeemed that and gave us the Spirit and gave us a tongue that bypasses our selfish fleshly motives so that the Spirit of Yahweh can unite us in the goal of establishing his kingdom here on earth as it is in heaven. Amen. Shalom to knock wisdom.